Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Kris and the Missing Prince by Art Blegen, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1. I am not a princess. I'm a knight, Kris shouted as she waved her baseball bat sword under the nose of the biggest boy in the neighborhood. You can't be a knight. You're a girl, he laughed back at her. I can too. I can do anything boys can do. Kris was tired of being treated like she wasn't good enough. Prove it, he sneered at her and batted her sword away with his own. She knew she shouldn't get angry, but she couldn't help herself. She lifted her sword back up, pointed it at his chest, and prepared for battle. He swung his sword through the air and batted hers away again. Before she even realized what she was doing, her bat sword swung right around at his legs. He tried to block her, but didn't get his sword in the way soon enough. Chris's sword hit him right below the knee and knocked his feet out from under him. He tumbled to the ground, and everyone laughed at him. Just as he was climbing back to his feet, Mr. Pence stepped out of the grocery store and stared at her, his fist planted firmly on his hips and his eyebrows raised. You know better than that, Kris. What would your mother say? He looked at his watch. You better get home. It'll be time for dinner soon. He must have been watching out the window. Kris gave one last conquering stare to her defeated foe before saluting him with her sword and heading back to the castle. The two-bedroom apartment she shared with her father was on the third floor. Kris climbed the tower one step at a time. She had to be very careful. The tower was the perfect place to keep a princess captive. Of course, she wasn't a princess, but most people didn't realize that. Even the king, her father, insisted she was a princess. Nobody believed she was a knight. Dragons and wolves hid in the shadows. She stalked down the hallway one cautious step at a time, her baseball glove shield held ready to ward off the fiery breath from the dragon. She swung her imaginary sword in front of her to scare them away. With one last rush, she leaped over the welcome mat moat, through the wooden gates, and into the safety of the castle. It was dark inside the castle. She carefully closed and locked the gates and walked through the empty ballroom toward magical lamps burning in the kitchen. His Majesty was cooking dinner. He wasn't really a very good cook, not compared to her mother. Mom died last year. Kris missed her mother, the wisest, most powerful queen ever. She wished she could see her again. Thinking of her mom brought a tear to her eye. Angrily, she wiped it away. Knights don't cry, she told herself silently. Kris, dinner is ready, her dad roared like a lion. Not a mean, scary lion that a good knight would slice with her sword, but the big, friendly, furry lion that she wanted to tickle and cuddle with. I'm right here, your majesty, she yelled back. He jumped so hard he dropped the wooden spoon. She giggled. She liked sneaking up on her dad and scaring him like that. She skipped her way around the table to the cupboard. She picked her favorite plate. It was blue and silver. Kris was certain it was a magic saucer before it broke. Her dad glued it back together, but the magic was gone. She chose a white plate with two blue flowers for the king and found two glasses that matched. She returned to the table and set two places. The chair across from her was empty. It had been empty for too long now, but nobody sat on the queen's throne. Hamburger helper again? Sorry, princess. I had to work late and didn't have time to cook anything else. Don't call me princess. I am a knight. It was the fourth day in a row for Hamburger Helper, but vanquishing foes was hard work and she was hungry. A minute later, she was wiping the rest of the sauce off of her plate with a piece of bread folded in half. When she was done, there wasn't enough left on her plate to feed a starving mouse. May I be excused? I must prepare for the tournament. She jumped up from the table before her father could answer. She ran to the sink, rinsed her plate, and set it on the counter next to the dishwasher. Then she ran into her room. It took her a minute to sort through her baseball caps. She picked just the right one to fit over her curly brown hair. A moment later, she bounded from the room and raced through the living room towards the door, her baseball glove shield in one hand and the wooden bat sword in the other. Princess, her father called as she rushed by. We need to talk about something before you go running off again. Drat. Her escape had been foiled, and now she was held captive by the tyrant king. With her head held high, the proud prisoner marched back into the throne room to receive her sentence. I got some news at work today. She heard something wrong in his voice and forgot all about being prisoner. What's wrong, Dad? Oh, nothing's wrong, really. It didn't sound like nothing was wrong. They just want me to do a special project for them. I'll get a big bonus for doing it, enough to get that air conditioner for you. He paused and looked at her before he went on. The problem is, the project is in St. Louis. St. Louis? She thought about the faraway kingdom. I don't know anyone in St. Louis. I'm afraid they won't let me take you. There will be nobody to watch you. I already called Grandma Mabel. She said that you could stay with her until I get back. How long, Dad? I don't know. Maybe a month. Grandma Mabel was her mom's mom. She had a farm near the mountains. It was almost all the way to West Virginia. Kris loved visiting the farm. She loved the animals. She loved swimming in the pond. And there was always a lot of adventures. But a whole month? She'd never seen any other children her age around the farm, only Grandma and an even older Mr. Rockwood. Her grandmother just didn't understand what it was like to be a kid. Maybe she was never a kid herself. Can people skip over being a kid? Maybe witches could. Wicked witches. No friends, no baseball games, no fair. She knew it wasn't fair to be angry at her father. She knew it wasn't his fault. Still, she had to be angry at somebody. A moment later, the door to her room slammed shut, and Kris forgot all about her rules against crying. Chapter 2. It took almost a whole day to drive to Grandma Mabel's farm. Kris loved riding in the car and counting license plates from other states. Each car had a story. This van was going on vacation to Florida. This car must be going to Washington, D.C. The red pickup over there was coming home from the beach. Even with all the stories, though, the drive was very long. The car became a horse-drawn carriage. She looked through the gold-embroidered curtains that kept the dirt out and looked out the window at all the little castles that dotted the Virginia countryside. She wished the king would let her ride a horse instead of trapping her in the carriage. Kris was sick of the car by the time they got there. Her dad pulled off the highway and onto the gravel road leading to the farm. Now she could get out of her cage and gallop around. Grandma Mabel was on the front porch of the house when the car stopped. Kris, dear, it's so good to see you. She stooped and gave Kris an unusually long hug. You look so much like your mother did at your age. You have her eyes and her beautiful hair. Kris liked it when people compared her to her mother and gave Grandma a big smile. Her dad unloaded their bags from the trunk and closed the door that Kris had left open. Suddenly, two large paws and a very big, wet tongue knocked Kris to the floor. Ralphie, stop, she giggled and wrapped her arms around the shaggy dog. Ralphie was much bigger than she was. Most St. Bernards are. He did seem a lot smaller than a year ago, though. Perhaps some wizard cast a shrinking spell on him. How are you, Mabel? Her father asked as he climbed the steps up to the porch. I can't complain, Stephen. How was your drive? Kris rolled her eyes. Time for some boring grown-up talk. Can I go play with Ralphie? She asked. That would be fine, dearie, her grandmother answered. We will be having dinner in about an hour, so don't go too far. Kris kicked off her shoes and sprinted off across the fields. The dog chased along beside her, barking happily. The field seemed to stretch for miles. She wondered how many trolls were hiding between the rows of corn. Once they harvested the corn, the fields would be an ideal place for jousting. As she passed the barn, she stopped and waved at Mr. Rockwood. He was a nice man who helped her grandma run the farm. Mr. Rockwood smiled and waved back. In the city, she would never run around barefoot, too many broken bottles to cut her feet on. On the farm, she loved to feel the soft green grass between her toes. The dirt underneath felt cool and moist. She found a stick lying on the ground under a tree near the fence and picked it up. Fetch, Ralphie, she yelled as she threw it as hard as she could. Ralphie turned and ran off towards it with Kris chasing after him. It was only a few minutes later when she heard the heavy brass bell ringing. It must be time for supper. Kris ran back to the house and jumped up the steps to the back door. Her nose told her right away that dinner would be something besides hamburger helper, and her tummy started rumbling. Wash your hands before you sit down at the table, princess. The roast beef smelled so good that she didn't even care what her dad called her. Kris shoveled the mashed potatoes into her mouth before she could even create a moat from the rich brown gravy. This was real night food. Outside, dark clouds rolled in and covered up the blue sky. By the time her plate was clean, rain was pounding on the roof and windows. She sank down in her chair in disappointment. She would have to wait until tomorrow before she could play outside again. They finished dinner and all three of them sat down in the living room. Grandma Mabel didn't have a TV. They are bad for your imagination, she always claimed, though Kris didn't believe it. Her dad sat in a recliner and opened his briefcase to do some work. Grandma perched in a rocking chair by the window to knit. Kris sprawled on the couch and lost herself in the Knight's Quest from her book. Some time later, she felt the powerful arms of her father lifting her and carrying her up the stairs. She was almost awake, but not quite. He set her down gently on the bed and pulled the covers over her. She felt her dad give her a gentle kiss on the forehead, and she heard him whisper, "Sleep well, princess." The last thing she heard was the sound of an owl echoing outside. Ooh.